Welcome to Volume 11 Rock Talk Podcast, brought to you by Volume 11 Music. Your hosts, Rich Hoffa, Rick Lawhorn, and Mark Dunn. Rock Talk, Volume 11 Music.
Starting off this one good. Hey, this is Volume 11 Music, and this is Rock Talk in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and I'm Rich.
Rick Lawhorn.
Mark Dunn.
All right, so if you're enjoying their videos, make sure to hit that like button and hit that subscribe button to share, to help out the channel and all that good stuff, and share with your friends so we can get more followers on there. Had fun with the last week's episode. This week episode, we're going to talk about what our Mount Rushmore of guitar players would be. So
we're talking rock-based
guitar players, rock bluesy, whatever. Yeah,
we
rock
love all them
bluesy.
too, but we're staying in the rock genre.
Yeah, rock the blues. And who would be your four guitar players that you would stick up there, and for what reason?
Okay.
I want to propose that I think that we're going to have so much crosstalk.
We will.
Probably
So
will.
we should have like
honorary mention or something. Honorable mentions or something like that. Yeah, I agree with
you
you, Mark.
can totally argue, not argue, but four is just ridiculous.
Well, there's so many great guitar players out there, but I think we could probably put four on there. We are going to have some crosstalk.
It's a Mount Rushmore, remember?
Yeah.
So it's the four.
So Mark, you kind of know what our four is, and we haven't heard what your four is.
We
So I'm going
haven't
to let you start it off.
Well, no, I mean, I think that if you think about rock and roll guitar, so can we agree that rock and roll is fundamentally drums and guitar?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is
Jethro
Tull.
No.
We got the flute there.
But you're right. It's a drum and guitar.
And what I'm getting at here is like the influence that the player would have on a populace to go out and get that instrument.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. And then at the advent of rock and roll, which is in the 50s, long before any of us were born.
Yeah.
But the de first person should be Chuck Berry, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's not to take
that was my first.
That's mine as well.
Scotty Moore, with Elvis was in the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could argue him, at the same time. But, Scotty wasn't writing songs. Elvis covered Chuck Berry songs.
Right,
Yeah.
yes.
So, and the way there literally are licks that are called Chuck Berry licks. And when you consider that he was playing in the Garden Eden of time in rock and roll,
Right.
he belongs on the mountain.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm looking at it in that aspect of like, oh my God, I got to get that guitar because this is so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Chuck Berry's the first one to really invigorate the masses
Yeah.
because of how he played.
Right.
And I think he was the first rock and roll guitar star.
Yeah.
You got
he was shredding.
shredding for 1950s.
Doing the duck walk and
There's
on a stage show.
There's the whole reason they did that scene in Back to the Future.
Right? Yeah.
So
you got to put Chuck out there.
You got to put Chuck up there. I mean, it's whether
rock
you
and
like
roll.
his music or not, it just is what it is.
Yeah.
And then if you go, in my opinion, if I base it on the influence and the impact that the player had culturally because of the guitar,
Yeah.
I'm skipping the Beatles, even though George is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm going straight to Jimi Hendrix.
Hendrix,
You got to do that.
About where I would have been as well.
Yeah.
On our picks,
And I'm only really kind of going chronological in time here. There's no hierarchy.
Yeah.
No.
Where it
Yeah.
started in
Yeah.
time.
Right.
Yeah.
And so Hendrix. I didn't mention Clapton,
Yeah.
and that's going to make a lot of people wonder why. And I'll tell you why. Because when Hendrix was playing in London, right when he was getting his first start over there, Clapton was walking out when Pete Townsend was walking in, and Pete Townsend said, "Is he that bad?" And Clapton said, "No, he's that good."
He's put us all out of
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
That's the story I've always heard. Yeah.
And so, it's just a shame that he died at 27, but he was a prolific musician and wrote and recorded a lot of material and played the guitar like no one else had. Plus, he also played with Little Richard. Just a lot packed into a short time. I would skip Jimmy Page. I know that's sacrilege.
Yeah.
And go straight to Eddie Van Halen for 78. And I think the biggest problem after Eddie is who has done what any of the three of those guys have done as far as for the instrument. And I don't mean, there's been some influences. Vi came out with the 7-string guitar. Nobody bought them in mass. They wound up in
Right.
pawn shops for $150, and a band called Korn started playing, and all of a sudden, every 17-year-old kid.
I was teaching them.
Yeah, we wanted a freaking 7-string. So stuff like that happens, but that was an accidental influence.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if there's anybody since Edward that would make it to that fourth spot for me. I mean, I think, there's players I love, but I'm trying to be objective, I guess, if I had just filled in with mine, I would just say Eric Johnson, because he's so good at so many things.
Right.
But still makes it all his own.
Yeah.
And God knows there's a crap ton of players we could describe that no one knows about that are like that. So,
Yeah.
But Eric Johnson, when he hits a chord, you know
it's
him.
Eric. Nobody's saying,
For sure.
But I would, just to piggyback on some of Mark's, so very similar. I would definitely start with Chuck Berry for the same reasons. He was kind of there were other great players too, but the rock and roll guitar star. You had lots of songs that had that big guitar solo. There's Chuck Berry licks. The next generation of bands, you got Beach Boys songs that had those licks in them. You've got Rolling Stones songs that had those licks in them. You've got Beatles songs
Every
that had
rock
those licks.
song has
Every rock song,
Every rock song.
up until maybe Hendrix, going the direction he went, had Chuck Berry licks in them. So Chuck's got to be on that Mount Rushmore of rock guitar playing, number one. Then, again, much like Mark said, Hendrix would be nice, so innovative, brought a lot of sounds that just hadn't been heard. I mean, even though he's using pentatonic scales and notes that other people use, the way he used it was so different. It's like a chef
And he played over key changes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And it's like a chef that figured out a new way to prepare a dish that other people have made lasagna, let's say, but he's done it a different way that's unlike everybody else's way of doing. So I feel that way about Hendrix. The fuzz tones, the crybaby, the wah, the using the Strat to the extent sonically of what the Stratocaster turned into. Not that he was the first player to use a Strat, but to use it and get all those dimensions of sound. Obviously, a big influence on Eric Johnson, as we know. Hendrix has got to be up there. Now, I am going to actually put, and I'll explain why in a second, Jimmy Page as somebody on my Mount Rushmore. There are players that are obviously more technically faster, Yngwie Malmsteen, players like that. But what Jimmy did for the rock and roll band, Led Zeppelin, they've got a blues element, they've got a Celtic element, they've got a Spanish flamenco element on some of their songs. They've got so many different influences, yet they always sound like Led Zeppelin. And just the way the blueprint of what he set up for a rock band and how influential that was on so many other bands, because his first two albums came out in 1969. So that set up everybody,
Plus
in the
played
70s.
the Yardbirds.
That's right, the Yardbirds, absolutely.
They had a few hits.
So I would say, so Page would be on my Mount Rushmore. And then my fourth one would definitely be Eddie Van Halen, who chronologically speaking came out the last as far as the timeline, but there's no denial of all the amazing innovations that Eddie Van Halen brought to rock guitar playing, his sense of rhythm playing, his great tones, his amazing leads, all the crazy techniques. We'd never really heard anybody sound quite like that, especially in a rock style band before. And there's just so much. So that would be my four: Chuck Berry, Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy Page, and then Eddie Van Halen.
And I would also argue Eddie probably drove more people to go buy
a
guitars.
guitar.
Yeah.
And get a guitar with a Floyd or some kind of tremolo so you can do the crazy bar dips on Eruption.
All of it. And the fact that they were trying to get that sound, and before Which Gives a Five, my brother used to live out in L.A., my brother John, and he ran the Universal movie complex out there, and then he came when Valerie dropped him off at the curb for a matinee. So John goes... So he heads out there, and this is back in the late '80s, and he says, "You want me to bring you in so before people start recognizing you?" Anyway, they got into a conversation, and John had mentioned that he had seen him at Hampton Coliseum a few times, and Eddie goes, "Hampton, Virginia. We sell a lot of guitars there."
Wow.
So
that's
for him
funny.
to be, this would have been like 88, 87 or 88. For him to be that aware
that marketplace was,
because Jimmy Page never thought about that.
No.
Jimi Hendrix never thought about that.
Yeah.
Chuck Berry should have thought about that.
Yeah, right.
But I mean, Eddie Van Halen drove guitar sales on a level like what Tiger Woods did for golf clubs after that first Masters.
Yeah, well stated.
Yeah.
Well stated. Totally agree with that.
Yeah. That's it. Well, my Mount Rushmore is going to be a little similar to these guys. I mean,
you're a drummer. Are we done?
Yeah, right. I know my guitar playing. Yeah, definitely Chuck Berry. He's going to be first on there, and you know, a lot of it, you know, not technically, but you know, just what he brought.
What he brought to the
brought
table.
to the table. He
Rock
was
and roll.
really, you know, probably if you think about it back then. I mean, he was the first you know, band musician that really kind of pushed the guitar in the forefront with his, you know, the licks and the stage show and you know, like I said, I don't think there's, you know, a guitar player out there that hasn't played a Chuck Berry lick at some point in their guitar playing, you know, universe, and so you know, you just can't, you know, discredit that at all. And then you know, again, moving into, you know, the next era, like you guys said, you know, Jimi Hendrix. I mean, what a, you know, just bringing in that distortion, the fuzz, and you know, the showmanship, and you know, the great songs and riffs and all that kind of stuff. He's another innovator, you know, as far as, you know, pushing it to the next level. You know, just fantastic. I mean, he's still, you know, timeless as far as that goes. I mean, lots of people covering his songs still, and all that kind of stuff. And then I'm going to switch it up a little bit because I think that my next one's going to be Jeff Beck, and I think that a lot of it, you know, I've always been a Jeff Beck fan. But even became a bigger, you know, Jeff Beck fan. But when I watched the documentary, and gosh, I mean, you guy goes from, you know, doing stuff in the Yardbirds to more bluesy, like Jimmy Page and Eric Clapton,
kind of,
and then he, you know, he just did it his way. He's just like, okay, well, I'm kind of done with this. And even though they were a popular band, I don't see it going much farther than what it does, and he moves on to something else. And then you just see his playing, you know, just change over the years, because he goes from that, I mean, he goes from playing with a pick to
fingers,
you know, to finger
crazy
style,
stuff with the
all the whammy bar
nuts.
stuff, and then you know, by the by the last, when he started doing all that, I mean, it's just so different than what anybody was doing. You know that that's Jeff Beck when you hear that. You know, it's just you know, pretty incredible. And then
I got to see him twice.
I've never seen him play. I've seen him play on, you know, watching
and the
videos,
first NAMM show I ever went to, I turned a corner and physically bumped into him.
Oh
wow,
that's
interesting. Okay,
that's
cool.
awesome. But yeah, so my fourth one's going to be actually a little bit different though. I'm going to put Stevie Ray Vaughan up there. And a lot of it, I think he just, you know, really elevated, you know, the Texas blues, and really gave it, you know, something, you know, that people, especially during the era that he was coming out in the 80s, when you got, you know, hair and glam metal and all that stuff going on. And
he was definitely
here's
different
Stevie
from
Ray
everything else
Vaughan,
that was
and he's
in the marketplace.
on MTV, and you know, and like going from, you know, watching Motley Crue to here's Stevie Ray Vaughan, totally something totally different.
And you know what's interesting about that too?
I just loved it.
He sounded like him, but a guy like Nile Rodgers, when he first heard him, because he was playing on the
David Bowie,
he was insulted because Stevie sounded like Albert Collins,
King and Albert Collins,
Freddie King,
yeah.
And so when that hit rock radio, I'd never heard those guys.
Same here. I didn't know. I'd heard the names, but I didn't know much about them.
But you know, that was an introduction to that without us even knowing.
Right.
So it was unique on rock radio.
Yeah, very rootsy and bluesy. And,
no, that rock radio was not getting anything like that before.
No.
Yeah, and there was another cool guitar player, Lonnie Mack.
Lonnie
my
Mack.
dad my dad, you know, had met Lonnie Mack, and they actually went out and had a beer. His band was the house band for when they were playing there up in Ohio. It's really cool because they did an album together, Lonnie Mack, and you know, he had a really unique sound as well, with the Leslie and the fuzz and Flying V, and you know, some great
Flying
licks.
Swells with the. Yeah, he really had a cool thing with that.
Yeah, but I think Stevie Ray really, you know, just like you said, he brought into, well, who else could I find that's got this bluesy type of tone? So that's going to be my four.
I think
guitar player.
Here should be another one, not to belabor, but the same thing. We should all contribute to this one.
Okay.
So, on an importance basis for rock guitar or guitar in general, you got to have Les Paul.
Oh, absolutely,
right.
Okay. So Les Paul is the godfather and inventor of so many things, like a Les Paul. So that's that's not even an honorary mention. That's just the fifth head, I think, on
Right.
Rushmore.
Yeah.
Because we wouldn't have a lot of the things we have today if it wasn't for him.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
For sure.
And there's so many other, like you said, the honorable mentions.
Jim
where we can go
Marshall.
on.
Yeah.
Marshall, yeah, absolutely.
Jim Marshall.
The Marshall
I have to say
amplifier,
because
yeah.
we wouldn't
Jeez,
have had what we have with these guitar players
Yeah.
without Jim Marshall.
Well, you look at how much rock guitar tones changed once the Marshall amplifier entered the scene.
And
you
Leo
know,
Fender.
And Leo, yeah, and Fender, obviously.
All those
Right.
guys have to be on their own.
And Leo didn't even play guitar, which always
right.
blew my mind. You know,
That's
he
right.
just loved music and invented cool stuff, but he really didn't actually, play guitar.
So to me, those three individuals,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, put the other faces on
The Mount
The
Rushmore,
mountain.
yeah.
Yeah.
just by their innovations. Because
Oh,
you
yeah,
don't
for
you don't
sure.
get the four players without those three guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Period.
Here's one. What if Chuck Berry hypothetically had used a Marshall tube amplifier?
And he was
Yeah.
using a Fender, I guess.
Because he was using Fenders
Or
back in the
Bandmaster, yeah.
50s.
Yeah.
You didn't really have I mean, just hypothetically, that would have been. Or B.B. King made a blues
Well,
album.
yeah,
with a
he-
Marshall amp.
I don't think they ever did they?
No.
Yeah. Because
He always played Fender amps.
Yeah, and so did BB. Yeah, that's an interesting. Well, AI.
Well, we have
Yeah.
to our AI.
could, a
Few weeks
yeah.
ago,
Yeah.
AI could do that.
Yeah, I mean, really, Chuck Berry or B.B. King Lee going through a Marshall, not harshly distorted, but you know what I'm saying? Like you cranking it up and you get some tube overdrive.
Right.
You know, like
How it's
early
supposed to
Allman
go.
Brothers album, for example.
I'm gonna see if I've got a friend of mine who's dabbling in
something
AI.
like that. That'll be
See if
fun.
he can do it.
A B.B. King or a, like I said, Chuck
Yeah,
Berry
yeah.
or Albert King playing through a Marshall stack.
Then again, you got isolated tracks that come out now, but it would still be reamping the Fender that's being mic'd.
Yeah.
So you'd have to really skip that. But yeah, that's funny. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
And they weren't using like distortion pedals. They were just kind of turning into the amp, just turning the amp up,
yeah.
Get a
right,
sound.
just to get a sound.
And with
yeah.
a curly cable.
That's
Yeah.
right. They did have this curly cable back in the day.
And I have two in stock.
Yeah,
by
there
the
you
way.
go.
If you
Come
want
on
a
down
curly
to Volume
cable,
11.
we've got one.
Yeah.
Heavy as can be, and they don't sit on the floor and
But
all that good stuff.
It's
So,
curly.
They don't tangle up
right.
though.
Yeah, right.
I tell you what, since I've had them for a while, I'll give you a
There you
discount
go.
on too. So.
Talk to Rich.
Is there anybody else that's not a player of players that should be on that another part of that mountain, a wing of the mountain, a face of the mountain?
Well, we got the studio players that go unrecognized,
Yeah.
right? And I know this is a step into the country where, of course, Brett Mason,
Yeah.
amazing guitar player.
On all
who
the
was
country
playing
hits
on
from the
every
90s,
country.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but a lot of people are like, no, never heard of Brett Mason.
Yeah.
But they've heard, oh yeah, I've heard this Brooks and Dunn song, I've heard this Garth Brooks song, I've heard
Alan
all these
Jackson.
Alan Jackson songs
Right.
that are hits that have these amazing, cool country Telecaster solos, and we know it's Brett Mason, but a lot of people that I've talked to are clueless. I've never heard of this dude.
And Steve Lukather played
Yeah, Lukather,
on
yeah.
so many
Oh, absolutely.
songs. And he played the rhythm guitar and the riff and the bass on Beat It.
Beat It, yes, correct.
And,
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think his discography is insane. Same with Landau.
Michael Landau, yeah.
But Lukather's a little bit more renowned because of Toto, because Toto was basically the band
That
on
were-
all those
They-
albums.
yeah, right. They were like
Yeah.
a lot of studio.
Yeah.
studio
Yeah.
guys, yeah.
But I mean, that you could go down the serious rabbit hole with that. But I would agree that technically, Les Paul,
Yeah.
Jim Marshall, and
Leo Fender.
Yeah, for sure.
those
those
all-
three right there.
It'll be a fun Mount Rushmore. That's
Oh
for
yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we better wrap up this episode of Rock Talk. Mark, where are
Yeah.
you playing this weekend?
I'm actually off this weekend, and I'm heading down to. I have a show in Atlanta, and then I head over to Tennessee in the early part of February.
Wow.
So,
Oh, cool.
yeah.
Cool. On the road again. How
Yeah,
about you, Rick?
I'll be hibernating. It'll be one of the last weekends. I have a very busy 2025, but Super Bowl weekend, I'm going to hibernate, kick back. Going to root for the Washington Commanders into the Super Bowl, I'm hoping. So, but I do not have a gig that week, and then from there, we're all over the Mid-Atlantic with Cactus Jack doing a lot of
Yeah.
here in 2025.
Yeah. And once again, I won't be doing any of that. I will be
But we are
working
going to
here.
play. We're going to play in 2025.
We are.
This
We're
thing
gonna
going.
put a
Yeah.
put a little
The
thing
volume-
together.
the Volume 11,
the
V11,
Volume
is that
11
what it's
band,
gonna be?
and
Okay.
we're gonna go out and do some shows, have some fun. So, but if you're enjoying the podcast, please hit that subscribe button, like the video, and share with your friends so we can get more followers and stuff. So we'll see you next week for another episode of Rock Talk. Have a good one. Peace.
This has been an episode of Volume 11 Rock Talk Podcast, brought to you by Volume 11 Music.